Namaskaram. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. Today is the 5th of March, episode number 112, and Sreedhar Chityalaji is joining me. Sreedharji, welcome to PGurus channel. As always, it's a bright and sunny morning here in California. How are things over there, sir?
Well, I think that it is bright and sunny, and we are on the cusp of another great day as we wrap up the weekend.
And in our main points yesterday, the Senate also passed the 1.9 trillion stimulus bill with zero Republican votes. So it is obvious that the Vice President Kamala Devi Harris uh, cast her vote to make this thing to pass. With this, now this bill goes to the President's desk for his signature. Sreedharan, as we had predicted, is going to be the chief ministerial candidate for the BJP party in the upcoming state assembly elections of Kerala. Do tune in. We have done a series of hangouts with Dr. Sreedharan, and we are going to be coming out with these interviews in the next few days. Please watch our channel, PGurus, and you will get to know about a person who is 88 years young with clear and concise thought processes. You are going to love it. US calls German warships plan to sail South China support for rules-based order. So this is a new thing that is going on. In addition to French, now the German ships are also patrolling the South China border. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said inflation is likely to rise as economy recovers, but it will be a temporary measure. And in our main points with US and LATAM news, as debt toll mounts, the United States could be looking at 100 trillion debt over the next 30 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Sir, this should US be concerned because it has been letting it run up since Reagan days.
Well, I think what is brought to the surface today is we had a close to $4 trillion of stimulus, 3.6, and a deficit of about another 600. So we added about 4.3 to 4.5 trillion, which we covered in the 2020 budget. We have $2 trillion plus another $2 trillion coming up, which is out in the public. So we could be hitting $32, $34 trillion very soon as we wrap up 2021. There is a tremendous concern in the CBO that as this debt toll takes on the balance sheet, there is no way by which this debt can be reduced because there's no reduction program. We're only talking about reducing the deficit. That means the gap between the revenue and the expenditure side of the government balance sheet. So there's no formal debt reduction programs in place. So as this debt mounts, it raises a number of questions around the currency, the interest rates, the strength of the US economy as a basis for others to invest, etc. So the warning signs are being given that 30 years is not too far away. There's a responsibility for this generation of politicians. What they do has a consequence for the next generation to come. And a lot more caution needs to be exercised. And there has to be some programs as to see how this issue is going to be tackled.
And in other news, senior Democrat breaks with Pelosi on the election overhaul in the interests of my constituents. Now, you had predicted this, that some of the places where there is a border and the Democrats may be a little bit wary of doing it. So is this one of those things, sir?
I think Benny Thompson from Jackson, Mississippi, is concerned that what happens here could happen in his constituency. His constituency is dominated by African Americans. So what he's saying is, if you can do this to some other constituency, what's the guarantee that you will not do this to me? Because there's an asymmetric concentration of the population. So he's basically saying, I don't support this. This is not a fair way by which one can run an election.
Now, I need you to help me understand this a little bit more. Pentagon's anti-extremism cull risks converting US military into a left-wing Praetorian Guard. Can you please establish a bit of context for our viewers on what a Praetorian Guard is, sir?
I think that what is happening here is they have been asked to review who is they. The defense secretary and the officials have been asked to review the entire composition and construct of the army and the people who man various positions, and to identify those who have extremist views, identify those who have potentially polarizing influence. All this stems from the fact that there was this fear that Trump could use the army. All this stems from the fact. And there were this allegation that was made that, ex-veterans were part of the January 6th insurrection. So therefore, they're saying, in other words, without munching words, they would like to have, very similar to the progressive government that is coming in place, a progressive, okay, a left-wing Praetorian Guard guarding the armed forces, whether in power or outside the power. The Democrats can have a pursuit, not just the Democrats, but the left-wing Democrats and the progressive Democrats can hold control. Right?
So,
Remember that Nancy said, before you do anything in Iran, you got to let us know. Before you press the nuclear buzzer, you got to let us know. Hey, watch out if they are Republicans. In other words, they're not saying in those words. There are too much Republican aligned people within the army. Then you got to make sure such people are not part of the process, and they should be within the rationalization of the program. There's no other word. There's nothing to mince words. But this is a most, I would call it as shameable act in terms of what has occurred.
Sridharji, for decades now, the army tends to vote Republican. There is no surprise about it because the army sees Republicans as being more in tune with, as far as foreign policy is concerned, what an armed soldier, armed forces person thinks, and they feel like the Republican Party represents them more closer than perhaps the Democratic Party. So now, is that being called into question? Are they going to look at the Facebook posts, the tweets of all armed personnel, and then they are going to cull out those they feel as being loyal to one party?
Well, I think that we have mentioned this time and time again in several of our shows. You have seen both Republican and Democratic presidents over the last, n number of years. But you have never seen a Democratic administration that is coming in with such profound and sweeping changes with absolutely no input from the other side. 80% is not equal to 50% is not equal to, or 56% is not equal to 100%. So there is still 44%. If the objective of the 56% is to exclude the other 44% in every decision of policy making, then you have a problem. I think that's where we are heading as far as this is concerned. Because in the next bullet point, we talked about the real misinformation campaign of the January 6th. Both these are correlated. Because again, when you take a look at the January 6th, there are a lot of allegations, armed insurrection, right? The word used, armed insurrection. So he should be impeached. The FBI and the guards found no arms, no stash of arms cached in Capitol. So where's the armed insurrection? Okay. Then they said, a whole n number of groups were identified. Except when you go deep into it, it was a Republican rally conducted by President Trump. So they're almost saying all Republicans should be branded this way because they were, leading the insurrection. But on the contrary, when you look at the truth, the Christopher Wray has not identified and isolated anybody. So they're going one step further and making sure that the community and the army, because the army is the one which, as you rightly said, historically swears allegiance to the flag. Look at the new progressive. There's no flag. Swears allegiance to the state. There's no state because we are talking about everybody kind of coming in. There's a rules. There's no rules. All rules as fame. So there is an interconnection between these two. So therefore, even the ex-armed forces veterans are raising concerns at this specific set of actions that is being contemplated. Now they've changed. They brought a retired guy to head to be the defense secretary, because who's a kind of thumbs what you call finger thumb man of the present kind of the regime. So which raises the questions around what exactly is the shape of things to come under this present, and this is a very sensitive area.
And the Republican congressmen and senators have expressed concern at the rising number of people wanting to cross into the United States. This is something that has been on the anvil since the time Biden assumed presidency on the 20th of January. Now, what is the plan? I mean, are they going to just open the thing and say, just come on in until we decide to stop this?
I think that's the way it looks to keep advancing the program. To give you one sentence, that's what it looks like. Now, apparently, in the border, people are now turning up with Biden T-shirts. So he's now opening up more tents to house the people. I don't know what exactly is the inner workings, whether actually these are Biden's decisions or the decisions are being made on behalf of Biden. Because we saw on, I think yesterday or day before here, he spoke, and when he was about to take some questions, when he said, "I'm prepared to take some questions," the feed was cut off. So no journalist could ask him any questions. So I think that look, we don't want to read too much in, but there is a real kind of a problem that is developing. There's no strategy.
And can you please give us a quick update on the confirmations of some of the members of Biden cabinet, sir?
Well, I think that Deb Haaland, won by 11-9. The committee, this is the committee before it goes to Senate, the committee vote, and of which Lisa shifted from the Republican side. Lisa Murkowski shifted from Republican and voted. That's how you got that 11-9 number. Is highly controversial kind of a figure and polarizing as well. But she says, she will give the benefit of doubt and do it. So that got through. Now, as far as the Xavier Becerra is concerned, that's deadlocked. So the vote is 14-14. This is for he's going to be the internal secretary. No, Deb is internal, and Becerra is Homeland and Health Services. Again, he has some views on abortions and so on. As you know, Republicans and Democrats are diametrically opposite side on the pro-life versus pro-choice situation. So that's why that's clearly held up. Deb goes through.
And in India news, in Odisha, ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel is going to set up a mega steel plant in Kendrapara with rupees 50,000 crores investment. Sreedharan is the BJP chief ministerial candidate and for Kerala, and is expected to contest from Kochi. Ayodhya Ram Mandir Trust buys adjoining land as part of expanding the temple complex to 107 acres. India has attracted a total of FDI, foreign direct investment inflows, of 67.54 billion in the first 9 months of fiscal year 21. That's impressive. Sir, would you like to comment on this before I go to the other items from India?
No, I think that my only comment is that just shows the stellar trajectory that India is in. There's one specific point that I would like to highlight, which we're not covering here, but which we discussed it in the Twitter. Whenever India's what you call bilateral trading partner is concerned, there's trade in goods and trade in services. Goods comprises of imports and exports. Then some of the services component comprises of including investments that are coming in, right? Now, everybody, when they try to point out, they say, oh, China has now back at the helm and India is and US is relegated. They do not. They use the word trade, but rather than trade, goods and services, when you combine, there's no comparison. China does not invest the level of money that United States does and United States access to for two reasons. One is a long kind of standing relationship. And second, there's a mutual trust to some extent between India and United States versus China, where we have constant skirmishes. So that's the only point that I would like to point out, which is to say, look at the number 150, 140, 160 billion, not this press which is projecting mainstream media in India 70 billion, 80 billion, 90 billion. That's only imports and exports.
And Arunachal government is going to develop 3 model villages along the India-Tibet border. And India needs flexibility to conduct joint battles in a digitized battle space, according to the Chief of Defense Staff, Bipin Rawat. And in a string of pearls port acquisition strategy, Adani Ports buys 31.5% stake in Gangavaram Port in Andhra Pradesh. In Asia news, we are going to share a very important graphic here just in a minute. US is going to build anti-China missile network along First Island chain as part of 27.4 billion spending in the next 6 years. To understand what First Island chain is, I'd like to point you to this graphic.
Right. The key thing to remember in this particular is what China is attempting to do via its South China, what you call siege, is to cut off United States effectively between East and South China. Okay, East and South China. So they have this line and then threaten the nations in between. It is called as denial of access and denial of trade. Okay. Further, the first chain comprises. You can see from the map all the way from the Okinawa, Japanese, making its way across Taiwan through the Taiwan Strait, then into Scarborough Shoals, into Philippines, bending past the Spratly Islands, which is a small map, then around winding down Malaysia, and then making its way into Cambodia and Vietnam. So this is what they call as the first island chain. The first island chain then covers vast part of the South China Sea, as you can see. So they are trying to build a natural kind of deterrence mechanism with a whole combination of what you call forces, comprising of navy, comprises of naval positions, comprising of the Air Force positions, Air Force points, as well as the artillery. So basically, this is acting as a kind of a deterrence. It's a fascinating kind of a strategy which was conceived, and now it is coming to kind of fruition. The second will go into further into the East China Sea, but more around the Pacific, the East Pacific, West Pacific. This starts come all the way from the other side of Japan and goes and covers islands such as Guam, Indonesia, and the Pacific. So they have effectively covered both the areas, and this is the strategic kind of the maritime gateway, which has access to close to 66% of the global trade. And this is a phenomenal strategy. Also in the map, you will find that we picked a map. You can see that there is two little red dots on the Indian border. One is the Arunachal Pradesh area, which is being disputed and contested by China. And I think we just informed you that India is taking a strategic position, which is namely that it is building its own infrastructure. Also, it's building some villages around that border. And then, of course, further up, which was the hot point of contest, which is the Galwan Valley and Ladakh and Leh region, which is the line of actual control. So these are the other 2 points where India is defending in its own way. In the prior Trump administration, both the US, the France, as well as Israel and UK had committed even boots on the ground to protect the sovereignty of India against any of the Chinese incursions.
And viewers, please disregard the fact that the Pak-occupied Kashmir is not represented in this map. This map is merely a reference. It doesn't reflect our stand. All we are trying to do is to point to you the places where the first island chain and the second island chain are located. The Chinese parliament is set to reverse the Hong Kong march to democracy. So, is this a new development, or they're just trying to make it even tighter?
No, they're formalizing it. They're formalizing. They will impose that, which is, they will impose. They will, because the autonomy is gone.
Right,
And
right.
there is no more independent legislative council members. There is no cross parliament. It'll be only rah, rah, rah. Everybody is Xi Jinping and wave the red flag. That's what it is.
And US and Japan plan an inaugural 2+2 of Biden era. Is this going to be a new era in March that US and Japan will continue to work even more closer than what they have been working?
Well, I think the way I read this is the 2+2 dialogue was constructed by actually India. It
Hmm.
was an India US India 2+2 dialogue comprising of the defense minister or the national security advisor and the external affairs ministers. A vast amount of policies and the strategic map and strategic work was laid out via this 2+2 meeting. Then Japan picked up. So Japan has the 2+2 dialogue using the same protocol. Then India, Japan established a 2+2 protocol. What is very conspicuous in all these discussions is India is absent.
And that is the new Biden doctrine, it looks like, and we have to see what consequences that is going to have, whether the Biden administration is messaging to India, and that would be really strange because the vice president has Indian American roots, and I'd love to know how Vice President Kamala Devi Harris is responding to in some of these meetings. Anyway, that's just my musing. Myanmar security forces shoot at 13 anti-coup protesters despite call for restraint. Singapore has advised citizens to consider leaving Myanmar as soon as they can. I think if this continues, more countries will start advising their citizens to leave Myanmar, isn't it, sir?
Correct.
So this is a bit of a concern. We have to see how quickly, in our opinion, I think, Sridharji, you'll agree with me that ASEAN as a bloc needs to come together and resolve this thing as quickly as possible before it starts escalating into a bigger crisis. Then in the next news, Australia rolls out a 10-year critical mineral plan as Beijing looms over global supply. Now, Australia became sort of like rich because Chinese were importing so many raw materials from there, and recently the relations have been strained. So, does this mean that as part of Quad, now the other countries such as India, Japan, and US will be directly working more with Australia to get some of the raw minerals and to make up for loss of trade from China? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a strategic deterrence, which is effectively to state that the China could hold or China could dictate terms. So the net result of this is Australia is developing a strategy in terms of how to harness and be a supplier. I think India is also involved in the discovery and harness and in of the rare minerals, much needed by the in and around the world, especially for US. And this strategy of Australia is very much driven by US putting a pressure on Australia to come up with a plan.
And a third strong earthquake of 8.1 on the Richter scale off of New Zealand coast triggers a tsunami warning. We have to wait and see whether that happens or not. In Europe news, 9 people were killed in an army helicopter crash in eastern Turkey, in the eastern Turkey region in the Kurdish part of Turkey. US blacklists 2 leaders of the Yemen Houthi movement, which is a flip flop because they lifted all sanctions as soon as they assumed power. Now, Mansour al Sadi and Ahmad al Hassan al Hamzi have been blacklisted again. Sridharji, is the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing in the Biden administration, and this soon?
Well, there are 2 great flip flops in Biden, in the Democratic administration. One is Mr. Kelly, who is going to be running the environmental kind of as the advisor, and then we have Mr. Biden himself, which is a flip flop. So the story here is that I think Mr. Mansour Al Sadi is Navy, and Mr. Ali Ahmad Ali Hassan Al Hamzi is Air Force. So 2 key people, one in the Navy and one in the Air Force, have been kind of, what you call blacklisted. This is just less than 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago they lifted, and now they're kind of they see more and more attacks coming from this Houthi, and they say that it is Iranian backed. I think it's very hard to see where these guys are going, but at least they've done the good thing. And by the way, on Monday we will be soon hearing about what they're doing to Mohammed bin Salman and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, indeed. And in markets, Jerome Powell said that there is a possibility that inflation might be going up in the short term, and that sent the markets tumbling. Paint us the big picture here, sir. How long do you think inflation might be a concern before things settle down? And what are your thoughts on the crude production inside the United States for the next 18 months?
First and foremost, I think that we had expected that the first quarter would be a gyration, and there would be volatility in the markets, driven by three factors: this excess stimulus that is being crept into the system. Nobody can comprehend as to what exactly why you need this size of a stimulus. The second is there's always been a pressure on the bond rates because there's been a flight of capital. So therefore, I think that the markets are saying that we need to raise the rates, because the rates are not set by what we call as in United States as the bond vigilantes. And then you have the third factor, which is the fuel hike. We anticipated a fuel hike because it has been fairly depressed, and the oil economies have been very badly hurt coming out of the COVID. They needed to find a way to fund all these different deficits, and there has to be a revenue. But what has compounded the problem is here the supplies from the United States going down because of all the bans that are coming into play. Now, to your other question, one of the big oil refining companies have stated that United States will not return in terms of the local production to the pre-pandemic levels. But does anybody care? No. So that is the reason why JP Morgan predicted a $5 to $10 band price increase in the crude. We are already close to $5.
And that brings us to a close for today's news. Stay tuned. As always, we'll be back tomorrow, same time. In fact, I take that back. We'll be back on Monday morning at same time, same location. Thanks for joining, and namaskaram.
Namaskar, and have a wonderful weekend.